The year is 1987, and American TV networks launch a number of short-lived shows, such as Starman, The Popcorn Kid, and Probe. In a fit of midlife nostalgia and an effort to remind the world of shows they have forgotten, lone podcast pilot Chris Cooling steps into the Forgotten TV studio 30 years later. From well-remembered to obscure TV memories of the 70s and 80s, including short-lived TV shows and made-for-TV movies, this is Forgotten TV. Welcome to Forgotten TV. I am your host, Chris Cooling. Don't forget you can jump on the Patreon bandwagon and support Forgotten TV for as little as $1 a month and become a producer. Patreon supporters gain access to Forgotten TV Supplemental, additional podcasts that go beyond the information presented in the show. More on this during the end credits. If you don't use Patreon, you can make a one-time or recurring donation using PayPal at paypal.me/ForgottenTV. Links for all of this are right here in the show notes or easily seen at forgotten.tv. If you'll indulge me for a moment, now that I have decent recording equipment and an enclosed studio, this year I'd like to break into doing voiceover work. If you have a podcast and want a voiceover for a promo, intro, or bumper, or you're producing an independent film and want voiceover for a trailer, please message me at Chris Cooling Voice on Facebook. Link in the show notes. Check it out. T2. If you thought you'd seen it all, see it again. The biggest movie of the summer is T2, rated R. You are watching the Sci-Fi Channel. They can attack him, they can judge him, but they can never break him. The nation is under siege, and now Jack Bauer is on his own. The season premiere of 24 begins now. Viewer discretion is advised. You are listening to The Projection Booth, the ultimate movie podcast. They came. They control. They live. The science fiction thriller from John Carpenter, now on video. Rated R. This episode of Forgotten TV was brought to you by executive producer Will Welton, and DVDs used for review were provided by Eric Fusco. Thanks, Eric, and thanks to all for your support of Forgotten TV. The year was 1974, and America was hooked on a feeling. President Richard Nixon resigned from office in the fallout of the Watergate scandal.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president.
Muhammad Ali and George Foreman had the rumble in the jungle.
This is the most joyous scene ever seen in the history of boxing. This is an incredible scene. The place is going wild. Muhammad Ali has won. Muhammad Ali has won by a knockdown.
The Soviet Union flexed their Cold War muscles with the launch of space stations Salyut 3 and 4. Unknown to the public, the former of these was an armed military space station which orbited Earth for 7 months. and the popularity of streaking reached an all-time high when a man managed to streak across the stage behind a bemused David Niven at the Academy Awards.
But isn't it fascinating to think that probably the only laugh that man will ever get in his life is by stripping off and showing his shortcomings.
And ABC brought Gene Roddenberry's follow-up movie to Genesis 2 to the air. If you'll recall where we left off on the last podcast, Genesis 2 aired to respectable ratings on CBS in 1973 and had been penciled in on their schedule as an upcoming series. However, CBS executive Fred Silverman decided to go ape instead when the Planet of the Apes theatrical film aired to even better ratings on that network. Spurned by CBS in favor of Planet of the Apes, Gene Roddenberry looked to ABC, who had expressed interest in the Genesis 2 series option to pick up the baton. But instead of ordering a series, they authorized another TV movie pilot and insisted on recasting the main characters and retooling the concept somewhat, while keeping the subshuttle and the generic backstory of Dylan Hunt being a 20th century scientist experiencing a new world after 154 years of suspended animation. ABC selected the storyline out of the 20 some-odd story outlines and scripts Gene Roddenberry had written for a Genesis 2 series. This time, he shared writing credit with relatively new TV writer Juanita Bartlett, who had written episodes of Alias Smith and Jones, The Magician, and the James Garner Western Nichols. She would later be known as a writer-producer for The Rockford Files. John Saxon was cast as Dylan Hunt. Harper Smythe was now played by Janet Margolin, and Star Trek alum Diana Muldaur was Marg, one of the leaders of the women's country most of the action takes place in. Planet Earth first aired Saturday, April 23, 1974, on the ABC Suspense Movie as the 209th Movie of the Week. It was sandwiched between Happy Days and Marcus Welby, MD. It was on against Snoop Sisters, followed by Police Story on NBC, and Hawaii Five-0, followed by the GE Theater presentation of the TV movie Larry with Frederick Forrest and Tyne Daly on CBS. It re-aired on the ABC Suspense Movie August 24, 1974, and the following summer on ABC's Wide World of Mystery Late Movie.
The Movie of the Week. ABC presents an original motion picture produced especially for the Movie of the Week. Tonight on the Movie of the Week.
This is the 22nd century, the land renewed, the air and water pure again. The conflicts of the past are gone. It is a new earth, new peoples and new customs. In some places, bizarre savagery. In others, advanced cities. Everywhere, new challenge and new adventure. And this is also the story of Dylan Hunt, lost in 1979 in a suspended animation accident. Over a century and a half later, in the year 2133, he was found and awakened by the people of this city called Pax, peace. The one place on Earth which escaped the final conflict of the 20th century. The one place on Earth where civilization did not perish. Dylan Hunt is one of them now, leader of a Pax science team exploring a much-changed world. Part of the Pax dream of rebuilding on Earth a new and wiser civilization. Their mission is mankind, rebirth of planet Earth.
At PAX headquarters, Dylan Hunt records his log report of a recent mission.
Dylan Hunt, log report to the PAX Council. Per instructions, we were escorting Peter Kimbridge on a survey which has confirmed that Central California is now an inland sea. Population along the shores, a handsome racial mixture, illiterate but intelligent. Although the land remains fertile, famine is common. Their primary need from us is education and agricultural techniques. With those facts determined, we headed homeward when the ambush occurred. They were Kriegs, that mutated form of human capable of understanding only machinery and warfare. It was clear that they recognized who we were and wanted us alive, possibly because they've heard that underground sub-shuttle tubes honeycomb the Earth and that only we of PAX know the secret. Slowing our progress was the age of Peter Kimbridge, his rapid exhaustion. Each of us in turn tried to divert the Krieg vehicle, while the others moved Kimbridge nearer and nearer a sub-shuttle tube entrance, where we hoped to escape.
While escaping from the Krieg mutants into a sub-shuttle entrance, Peter Kimbridge is seriously injured by a rifle bullet. Making their way to PAX headquarters, Baylock, an Esper, reaches into Kimbridge's mind and confirms he is dying. Isaiah offers a prayer to ancient gods for his recovery.
Concluding log report. If Kimbridge dies, the responsibility is mine. And our return to PAX has made this burden no easier. To me, Kimbridge is PAX. Its grace, its warmth, its dreams of helping Earth rebuild again. He is the man who discovered my body in suspended animation, whose skill brought me to life again, whose wisdom helped me to understand that the best of my own 20th century is not dead, that Earth is still my home, its people still my people.
Kimbridge needs a delicate surgery within a couple of days to recover. Only 2 known surgeons can perform the operation. One is in another part of the world, and the other is Dr. Connor, who disappeared a year ago in a nearby region.
As the first PAX team available, we are headed for what seems our best chance of finding Dr. Connor alive. We hope that the Kriegs are moving in another direction by now. Our destination is an unexplored region out of which have come stories of a strange Amazon society where males are bought and sold like captive animals. Women's lib? Or women's lib gone mad?
Dylan takes a PAX team on a sub-shuttle. Dylan splits the team. Isaiah and Baylock will take a direct approach into the most populated area, and Harper Smythe will lead Dylan into the region, ostensibly as her prisoner, as a covert attempt to enter the women's country.
Who are you?
I've come to join your confederacy. I've brought a male captive from my country to prove I agree with your beliefs.
What do you know of the women of Ruth?
I subscribe to your principles. Female dominance is the natural order of life.
Eyes down!
Stop that!
Eyes down! He hasn't been properly trained, but he looks healthy enough to bring a good price. I challenge your ownership.
But it's obvious that I own him. You saw me ride in with him.
I've just challenged you for this male. Will you fight for him or not?
He is my property.
He was your property.
The woman Marg seizes Dylan as her own property. Riding into the village, Dylan tries to find if she knows the whereabouts of Dr. Connor.
My country, miss. Jonathan Connor. He came here about a year ago.
I've explained to you the rule here is silence.
But perhaps this friend of mine and myself can help you. We can be of value to you. You have men pulling wagons, plowing fields. This friend of mine knows how to train horses to do it better, faster, or even oxen.
Why? You dinks are more easily trained. You take care of yourselves. You grow your own food. Why should we bother with animals?
That's the second time you've mentioned training. What kind of training?
We don't geld our males, if that's what worries you. It would make them too fat and lazy. But if you break the rule of silence again, I'll make an exception in your case.
Marg leads Dylan into a village, to Villar.
Now listen carefully. Wherever you're from, you're a dink now. Untrained, but still a dink. The rules are made simple so that even a male can understand them. Show obedience at all times and you'll find happiness and service to the community. As long as your behavior warrants it, you'll be protected, fed, clothed, relieved of all the responsibilities that your sex finds so difficult in life.
Dylan finds Isaiah and Balak imprisoned as he is, but they are mentally weak and fearful. Dylan manages to reach Balak momentarily and learns Balak suspects something in the food is mentally altering the men of the region. Isaiah is auctioned, and the women spot Dylan and suspect he would be good breeder stock and that he will be tested in front of all.
He'll be offered his breeder stock tomorrow after training.
All right, I'll take him and I'll reserve this one.
Not so fast, Elba. I need a breeder, too.
He's got spirit. I may bid for him myself.
I hope training won't affect him too much.
We'll want him tested, Villar. Agreed?
Agreed. You'll see him tested.
Dylan is fed gruel along with the other male slaves, but tricks his way out of eating it. Meanwhile, Harper Smythe finds her way to the home of Treese, who seems to run a kinder, gentler type of household, but still believes in female superiority. She learns only Marg has the secret of the dink extract given to all males in their daily gruel. It was originally only given to troublesome males, but now is given to all. But male compliance comes at a price. Nearly all of them are now infertile. With all of this going on, the Kriegs are planning their attack on the Women's Confederacy.
Full strength tomorrow sundown. Commander, soldier. Position units. 1 to attack each female household. They're males. They will not fight. No, Commander, soldier. The women do something which make men fear their own shadow.
Dylan, sneaking around, is caught and brought to Marg, who gives him a direct dose of the extract. The next day, he is taken to auction, but this is interrupted by the arrival of Harper Smythe, who publicly challenges Marg for ownership. HS and Marg have a good fight, with HS gaining the victory. Marg takes her defeat with honor and offers HS friendship. Treese challenges the status quo.
Are you still peddling that nonsense, Treese? The human male is an unstable creature
Who can easily be controlled by any real woman. Unless she's afraid he'll end up by dominating her.
I'd like to see the male who could dominate me.
Perhaps that's exactly what you'd like. Secretly.
Harper Smythe travels to Marg's ranch to try to identify if any of her slaves are Dr. Connor. Dylan is not much help to HS in his drugged state. Even so, the two still find a few minutes to make out until Dr. Connor suddenly appears. Dr. Connor gives Dylan an antidote, and they make plans to distribute it in the daily gruel. As part of this scheme, HS convinces Marg to exchange Dylan for Connor, so they can carry out this plan, and the now sober Dylan becomes one of Marg's house dinks. Dylan relates an outrageous story of 14 wives and 41 children to try to stimulate feelings of jealousy and curiosity in Marg. The plan works, and we are given a lengthy scene of Dylan seducing Marg with copious amounts of wine in her bedchamber until she passes out. The next day, the Kriegs then attack the Confederacy households. But the males have eaten the gruel with the antidote, and the males all fight. Isaiah even shows up for the fun.
They fought for me. My dinks fought for me.
Because they're no longer drugged. We'd all be dead if they were.
No, every household has fought like this. It's happened over the entire Confederacy.
Donna, we need you. I just spoke to Pax. Kimbridge is hanging on.
Here are 200 horses.
Come on, Connor, Baylock, Isaiah, get in. HS, help with the injured. I'll be back for you.
Taking a Krieg car, Dylan takes Connor and makes for the nearest subshuttle entrance. Later, the women of Ruth have a conference.
Agreed, then? All our households will try it without the extract.
Agreed.
Agreed. But it won't be the same. Imagine a household with undrugged males underfoot, chattering, making mischief, and children, perhaps.
HS, any word yet?
Yes, I just received a message that Jonathan reached surgery in time.
Then the pater will be all right.
Yes.
Oh, that's good news.
I'm almost sorry I can't stay on, Mark.
I'm not. You're the worst of everything that's vile in the male species. She laughed at me when I told her about the 14 wives, your 41 children, your secret ritual. I've never felt so demeaned, so insulted, so...
Hungover?
Come back, Dylan Hunt.
On equal terms?
On balanced terms. Men, they have their place.
Back at PAX headquarters with Pater Kimbridge recovered, things wrap up.
Here's Dylan now.
Pater, it's good to see you looking so well again.
He'll be running with our young people in a few weeks.
Papa Smythe tells me you've had some most unusual experiences.
Oh, yes, Pater. Did she mention that I was her dink for a while?
As a matter of fact, she didn't.
I don't think we should tire the pater with too many stories.
Oh, I want to know. It sounds very interesting.
No, actually not. Dylan was drugged. He hardly knew what was going on.
Actually, most of it's beginning to come back to me, HS. Oh, except the part with you. That's a total blank. Were you a good mistress?
Not nearly as good as Marg, I'm sure.
Marg?
I don't think we should tire the pater with too many stories.
The 22nd century, a reborn planet Earth, 1,000 new adventures. This has been one of them.
Behind the scenes. The production design makes Planet Earth seem more modern than the prior installment. Things appeared slicker, brighter, and more familiar this time around. There is a reason for that. First, Star Trek veterans Mark Daniels and Bob Justman were brought in to direct and produce, respectively. Along with director of photography Arch Dalzell, the tone and lighting were changed from the dark, claustrophobic underground to well-lit wide shots with recognizably staged action sequences. This time, PAX is an established technological organization with modern medicine. The gender-neutral concepts of the PAX from the first film are clearly gone. We are even given a captain's log of sorts to start off the story, which Hunt narrates into a tricorder-like device. Harry Sukman returned and gave us more of a Johnny Quest-sounding theme this time around. The incredible John Saxon, sporting an epic comb-over, was the energetic leader of PAX team missions. Saxon was fresh off his role as the leg-biting, crotch-kicking Roper on the 1973 Bruce Lee film Enter the Dragon. Janet Margolin was a new Harper Smythe. She had just been seen by TV viewers on the TV movie Pray for the Wildcats. Sadly, Janet Margolin died in 1993 at age 50. Two-time Star Trek actress Diana Muldaur was very effectively used as Marg, one of the leaders of the matriarchal society. Ted Cassidy returned as Isaiah, and Majel Barrett was briefly seen for a few moments on a video monitor. William Ware Tice returned to do the costume design. Instead of Pax wearing ascetic, gunny sack-looking clothing, Pax wears very well-designed, modern two-tone green full-body uniforms, which look as if they could have been prototypes for the ones seen on Star Trek The Next Generation 13 years later. In fact, the same avocado green material used for Captain Kirk's tunic, which appeared gold under studio lighting, was used by Hise in these costumes. These were complete with a left breast pocket which held a communicator, again referring to how they would later do things on The Next Generation. The uniforms were unisex design. No 60s miniskirts here. Janet Margolin stated, "You should see the jumpsuits we wear. Can't tell men from women." Location shoots were at UC Irvine's Langston Library and Murray Krieger Hall, and these modernist, futurist buildings are seen in the opening and closing scenes at PAX headquarters. Ironically, 1972's Conquest of the Planet of the Apes had been shot on the same UC Irvine campus. The absence of trees on the fairly new campus gave the director the stark city look he desired for the film. By the time Planet Earth was filmed, trees and landscaping had grown. The women's country locations were shot on a Malibu Canyon ranch. The sub-shuttle set was reused and given minimal redressing. A matte painting from Genesis 2 was reused, originally depicting Tyrrhenia, now representing the Pax Metropolis. Roddenberry was not happy with the recasting of John Saxon as Dylan Hunt, and commented on the casting and the concept and story changes ABC requested he make for Planet Earth. In Planet Earth, the second Genesis 2 attempt, the casting was just a horror. They turned down all the names I suggested. They were so far into the production date, they didn't even run screen tests on my people. Networks and studios have the philosophy that if something doesn't sell, the actors didn't make it work. That's not necessarily valid, but they don't want to take any chances, and John Saxon was chosen to star as Dylan Hunt. They also decided that the underground city of Pax was too down and built it above ground. The sub-shuttle system remains, as well as Pax being a secret order and helping the world anonymously. This is because most of the civilizations are hostile, and they can do their work without being attacked as a threatening force. There were stories written where they would let themselves be known to civilizations where it was not a risk, and they could coexist. The film introduces the Krieg mutants, capable of understanding only machinery and warfare, who drove around in Mad Max-style post-apocalyptic vehicles they kept running by adapting them to run off gasifiers, wood-burning furnaces made to power internal combustion engines. This was 5 years before George Miller would bring us 1979's Mad Max, which cemented the post-apocalyptic roadways concept into pop culture. The Krieg scarred their faces with a K on the right side and had sagittal bumps along the top center of their head. The Krieg design was likely a creation of Robert Kinoshita, Planet Earth's art director, whose credits include Forbidden Planet, Lost in Space, and go all the way back to Men into Space, a 1959 science fiction series. He is someone Gene Roddenberry could have met as early as 1956 on the set of Highway Patrol. The Klingons in 1979's Star Trek The Motion Picture would feature a similar cranial ridge that would start at the nose and run over the head down the sagittal plane to their spine. This new Klingon design was largely the work of costume designer Robert Fletcher, and according to Cinefantastique magazine, this look was indeed inspired by the appearance of the Krieg in Planet Earth. It was Gene Roddenberry's concept that the new head ridges were an outgrowth of the Klingon spinal cord. The story called for horseback riding and a couple of fight scenes for Diana Muldaur. Although she clearly did some of this, if we didn't see her face, we were seeing her stunt double, Stephanie Epper. As long as there have been movies with cowboys falling off horses, there have been Eppers. Although an exact count is difficult due to the number of decades involved, around 15 members of the Epper family have risked life and limb in the film industry since the 1930s. Whether it was Gary Cooper doing a fancy dismount from a horse, Kathleen Turner's Joan Wilder being swept down the mudslide in Romancing the Stone, or driving the bus that gets ripped apart by Bone Crusher on Transformers, and Epper was involved in all these stunts. Stephanie is the sister of the more well-known Jeannie and the daughter of John Epper, one of Hollywood's original stuntmen. Jeannie began her career at the age of 9 and later was famously Linda Carter's stunt double on Wonder Woman. All 6 Epper kids, Margot, Gary, Tony, Andy, Jeannie, and Stephanie, learned to ride horses early and even knew Roy Rogers' horse, Trigger, who was stabled at the end of their street. Margot, the oldest, acted out the stabby Norma Bates persona in the shower scene of Psycho. Tony, Gary, and Andy were known as the terrors of Lone Ridge Avenue, galloping horses along the road, riding them alongside passing trains, and leaping onto the train cars. Stephanie, or Steffi, was the busiest of the kids after she became Johnny Washbrook's stunt double on My Friend Flicka, as well as Bobby Diamond's stunt double on Fury. Steffi became a fight scene specialist, and with TV westerns popular through the 70s, found regular work. She stunt doubled for Amanda Blake on Gunsmoke, Barbara Bain on Mission Impossible, and for Linda Evans on Dynasty. In 1965, on the set of the film The Rare Breed, Steffi, along with 2 others, had a close call. Steffi and stuntwoman Patty Elder were supposed to be thrown clear of an overturning wagon. Instead, they were slammed underneath it when the wagon structurally failed and broke up during the stunt. Steffi and Patty landed in a shallow camera pit, which allowed them enough space to prevent being crushed, only suffering minor injuries. Stuntman Hal Needham was driving the wagon and suffered a pulled shoulder. The scene ended up being preserved in the film. Actress Maureen O'Hara witnessed the crash. "I was sure they were killed. It's a miracle they weren't." Jimmy Stewart concurred. "If an accident like that took place without trained stunt people, they'd all be dead now." 17 years after Planet Earth, when it was time for her character Rosalind Shays to go down the elevator shaft on the set of L.A. Law, Diana called on Stephanie Epper once more. Stephanie Epper is a founding member of the Stuntwoman's Association and an inductee in the Stuntman's Hall of Fame. Her daughter Kim also became a stunt performer. Jeannie Epper was just awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award at the Artemis Women in Action Film Festival during the writing of this podcast. No Epper has ever died performing a stunt. Well, let's talk about the elephant in the room, the female-led matriarchal society depicted in the film. The women of the Confederacy had great, strong-sounding Nordic and European names like Marg, Villar, and Bronte. The medieval-looking European-style hair braids on the women were reminiscent of those sported by Fausta, the Nazi Wonder Woman, which would air 2 years later on the same network. The men and women of the Confederacy seemed to be all Caucasians of European descent. No people of color are seen. How this and other non-Pax groups in this future developed seemingly along racial lines has troubling implications and is not dealt with. It's also interesting how the Pax leadership is now depicted. Instead of a body of primi made up of men and women running things, we are now shown a single leader, and his title changes from the gender-neutral term primus to pater, Latin for father, a title historically given to male community leaders. No other leaders are shown. Yes, he may be a black man, but the men seem to be in charge in this iteration of Pax. This is emphasized in the very storyline we are given. Pax seem to have highly capable female agents. Instead of assigning an all-female Pax team to infiltrate the Confederacy and retrieve the missing doctor, we have this story where Dylan must be brought in to accomplish this. Given the opportunity to present a legitimate commentary on male chauvinism or even slavery, given that the women's country is even called the Confederacy, the movie instead plays like a pseudo-commentary on feminism, written from a male fantasy point of view. Scenes play out with an obvious sexual dominance, bondage theme, complete with whips and riding crops. An example of this is when they repeatedly refer to the need to test the male slaves in front of an audience of bidders to see if they would be acceptable as breeders. Exactly what kind of testing is left to the imagination of the audience, but Marg's earlier threat of castration to Dylan leaves little doubt that he would be expected to sexually respond in front of the bidders as a potential breeder, much like a stallion is expected to when exposed to a mare in estrus. The demeaning slang term dink is used to refer to the male slaves. This term is a derivative of the slang term dingus, which was a Dutch word meaning thing. In the very late 19th century, this term was used to refer to the male appendage. The fact that this is treated as an almost light-hearted BDSM fantasy is distasteful, given the history that both male and female black slaves were often sexually abused in parts of the pre-emancipated United States where slavery was practiced. Yes, the story seems to be saying slavery and extreme sexual power imbalances are wrong, but isn't it sexy that the male prisoners are going to be forced to mate with their dominant female captors? Futurama spoofed this concept 34 years later on the episode Amazon Women in the Mood. In this episode, Fry, Zapp Brannigan, and Kiff are both terrified and aroused to be sentenced by the femputer, voiced of course by B. Arthur, to death by Snoo Snoo. Actually, I think Kiff was just terrified.
Yes, a little tighter. Tighter. Perhaps a hard spanking is in order. Too hard!
Men strange. You have them on your planet?
I'm afraid so.
What they for? Oh, you mean Snoo Snoo?
After lengthy femputations, I, Femputer, have decided the fate of the men. Femputer sentences them to death! By Snoo Snoo!
Yeah! What are you, gay?
To be fair, ABC likely wasn't looking for a serious examination of sexual politics or the ethics of human slavery. What were they looking for? According to Roddenberry, they may have been looking for something more along the lines of that Futurama episode than what we got. Remember that list of Genesis 2 story ideas? It was ABC that picked out the plot of Planet Earth, choosing the poodle shop story idea teased in a scene from Genesis 2.
You do well to avoid the woman's country, Dylan. Males are tolerated there only as pets.
When we did Planet Earth, ABC insisted on doing a story I thought was wrong. It was a kind of women's lib story set in the future and wasn't very interesting. I think what they had in mind when they pushed us in that direction was that they would be science fiction women with long legs, silver costumes, and well endowed. After we shot it, they came in very upset and disappointed. They didn't realize that's not my kind of science fiction, and I was surprised they thought I might do that kind. I was trying to design a believable society that might exist under those circumstances. Nothing like what they had in mind. It was a breakdown in communications that contributed to the outcome of Planet Earth. I think Gene was telling us it was good enough for a typical episode, but not something he wanted to make the plot of a pilot movie. In fact, this idea is older than the list of plots for Genesis 2. Poodle Shop was itself an adaptation of an unused story idea for Star Trek. From the original 1964 pitch document, which listed 25 story ideas, was The Pet Shop. The Pet Shop. Exactly duplicating St. Louis 1918, a city where women are so completely the masters that men have the status of pets. Something of a satire on people and dogs. This story shows men treated in that fashion, caged in kennels, others clothed and perfumed and treated as lapdogs, as long as they continue to fawn, appreciate, and selflessly love. To say that this was a poor story choice for a pilot movie is an understatement. Members of the cast each offered different thoughts regarding the film's plot. Diana Muldaur. When they offered this part, I thought it would be the ultimate of women's lib. Men are called dinks, kept as slaves, house servants and field hands, used when necessary for breedings. But do you know how we keep them this way? Submissive and docile. We drug them. The only way to control men is by sedating them. It's the ultimate put-down of women. Janet Margolin. I hate to say this, but when I'm out with the dinks, riding among them, swinging my whip, ordering these men around like cattle, you know what? I like it. John Saxon recalls Gene Roddenberry's reservations concerning the story. He told me of his anxieties, which I did not understand quite at the time. He said, "What troubles me is the humor." I said, "How can that trouble you? That's the best thing in the film, that it's funny." But the powers that be at ABC at the time, this was before Star Wars and all that, they assumed that sci-fi had to be something somewhat serious, and felt that humor and sci-fi didn't go together. They were dead wrong, because that's the kind of thing that made Star Wars successful. It had that live kind of thing where creatures were funny and all of that was touched on in Planet Earth. All these years later, Planet Earth has survived. It was a big seller in video stores, and most people remember it very well and fondly because it was funny, as well as being an action-adventure film. Roddenberry did seem to revisit the same tired themes. 14 years later, the concept of a matriarchal society appears again on Roddenberry's Star Trek: The Next Generation in the early episode Angel 1. The episode was written by Patrick Barry in his only Star Trek script and was originally intended to be a commentary on apartheid. Co-producer Herb Wright recalls, Gene knew all of the right words to say, but he didn't believe them. I sat in on a story meeting with Patrick Barry, who was an outside writer. The story was called Angel 1, which was made. It was all about a reverse world society in which women ruled and men are subservient. It's been done 1,000 times already. So one of the major issues that we didn't want to do was an Amazon women kind of thing, where the women are 6 feet tall with steel D-cups. I said, the hit I want to take on this is apartheid, so that the men are treated as though they are the blacks of South Africa. Make it political. Sexual overtones? Yes, but political. Well, that didn't last very long. Everything that Gene got involved with had to have sex in it. It's so perverse that it's hard to believe. The places it was dragged into is absurd. We were talking about how women would react, and Gene was voicing all the right words again, saying, oh yes, we've got to make sure that women are represented fairly, because after all, women are probably the superior sex anyway, and it's real important we don't get letters from feminists, because we want to be fair, and we don't want to infer that women have to rule by force if they do rule, because men don't have to rule by force. Very sensible stuff. All of a sudden, something kicks in and he changes. However, we also don't want to infer that it would be a better society if women ruled, because, as we all know, and now he's getting louder and louder, women are gods. You can't trust them. They're vicious creatures who will cut your throat when you're not looking. Then he looks out the window, looks at the outline, and says, okay, on page 8, and continues like that didn't even happen. Angel 1 was considered by one reviewer to be one of the absolute low points of the show. Producer Maurice Hurley recalls the episode as terrible, just terrible. One of the ones you'd just as soon erase. Forgotten TV will return after these messages.
Captain's log, stardate 5122-6, on a mission to Gamma 6. Spock, Bones, Scotty, and I beamed down, not knowing what to expect. We approached the idol. Its jaws were moving. Suddenly, 5 Lilliputians appeared, each attached to the other. The aliens placed themselves in front of the idol. Strange animals tried to grab us. Bones was trapped in a man-eating plant. Suddenly, the floor gave way. I was in the cave. The Lilliputians were friendly. Mission to Gamma 6 was a success.
Kevin, this is Scott. Kevin, this is Scott. Do you hear me? Over and out.
The Star Trek communicators with push-to-talk button.
Scott, this is Kevin. My bike is broken. Can you help me? Over. Yes, but send me a signal so I can find you.
Star Trek communicators with a range of 1,300 feet. Push button, twin warp sound, uses 9-volt battery, not included. Star Trek communicators with belt hook, telescoping antenna, and twin warp sound from Ego.
After the airing of Planet Earth, ABC didn't give it a series order, but still thought the general concept had potential, and John Saxon was very well received as the more energetic Dylan Hunt. After 2 years working on Pax and Dylan Hunt, Roddenberry returned to his old offices at Paramount and began working on reviving Star Trek as a TV series. More about that later. Not interested in attempting a third Pax TV movie, Warner Television decided to produce a third attempt without him. Without Roddenberry's involvement, the concept was drastically revamped, with only the Pax organization name and the plot point regarding suspended animation remaining. Saxon's character name was changed, and this time Pax was a 20th century organization that intentionally placed 3 agents in suspended animation on a space station for 180 years. Gone were the subshuttles. Now the Pax team got around in an Earth roamer-type vehicle, searching for the never-seen Pax headquarters. Lifting a phrase from Captain Kirk's voiceover, this third and final iteration was called Strange New World. Strange New World aired on Sunday, July 13th, 1975, as the ABC Sunday night movie, very early in the evening at 6:30 Central, running for a full 2 hours. It was on against The Wonderful World of Disney, which aired a repeat of Greta, the Misfit Greyhound, followed by a repeat of Macmillan and Wife on NBC. CBS was airing Joey and Dad, a very short-lived variety show, followed by a repeat of Kojak. ABC reran it June 3, 1977, as the first movie of a Friday night double feature.
ABC. Sunday. Movies. The ABC Sunday Night Movie.
This is the Pax Space Laboratory. We were working on an experiment in suspended animation. That's me, Captain Anthony Vico. I went from test pilot to astronaut, and now I'm leader of the Pax team. Allison Crowley, navigator and communications expert. Pax Doctor William Scott. In our deep sleep, we thought all was well. While Mission Control monitored our flight path, they discovered a mass of giant asteroids hurtling through space directly toward us. They were able to recompute our orbit, away from the speeding asteroids. They could save us, but not themselves. Meteors rained down on Earth for days. It was the worst disaster in the history of the world.
saved us by extending our suspended animation. Our new orbit would loop the sun and return in 180 years. We were awakened by the computer, and it gave us our instructions. Return to Pax. Free those helpless people from an endless sleep. We moved through the connecting tubes to the shuttlecraft in the exit chamber. I fired the engines and set our glide path for re-entry. We safely blasted away from the space lab. What would we find in the strange new world? We survived the crash landing of our shuttlecraft and were able to retrieve the Vesta Explorer vehicle. All of our equipment seemed to be working properly, and Allison was able to tune in on the Pax emergency recall signal. We'd been following this signal for days as it faded in and out. I had the feeling we were no closer to Pax now than when we started.
It's coming in again. Strong.
We must be sitting on it.
Overwhelmed by this radio transmission, the 3 PAX team members fall unconscious. They are then shown receiving advanced medical scans before awakening in spacious, comfortable quarters, wearing Roman-style tunics. Dr. Scott is invited to meet the creepily soft-spoken surgeon. Meanwhile, Vico and Dr. Crowley randomly activate controls exploring their quarters, and attendants arrive to stop them. In a scuffle, the seemingly well-built attendant Sprang is easily killed. The surgeon reunites the 3 for Sprang's funeral, and a now-healed Sprang springs up from his coffin.
What is this, some sort of Alice in Wonderland game?
No, we wouldn't be that cruel. He did die. In your frame of reference. Arana? A demonstration is in order. Arana. What is our most cherished gift?
Life.
And in celebration of life, I salute you.
The surgeon plunges a dagger into Arana as part of his deadly demonstration. After the commercial break, the PAX crew is led into an operating room where Arana is being repaired.
Are you really saying what I think you're saying?
There is no death. As you know them.
I mean, as we know it, death is death.
Where do your donors
Where do you get your transplants?
I'm sorry, you'll have to hold your questions. They'll all be answered.
Wait a minute.
Are you ill? I'm sorry, you'll have to wait.
The surgeon weakens and is carried away, and Dylan is allowed to wander the grounds and easily finds the Vesta Explorer.
There it is, right where we left it. Something strange about this. They've taken the power relay. Now they really have us.
Meanwhile, Dr. Crowley learns the place is called Eterna and finally notices the absence of children.
Where's Tony?
Thought he was with you. What's the matter?
There are no children here.
What do you mean?
I mean, the girl told me that there have never been any children here, ever.
There have been many changes in 180 years.
No children? How do you reproduce?
We don't. The Holocaust destroyed our reproductive capabilities.
You're thriving, vital people, healthy and beautiful.
I'd like to show you something. Behold and believe. A complete, complex human organism grown from a single cell of the human body.
The surgeon has repeated instances of senility, and Dr. Scott stumbles upon such a scene and learns of his true age.
What's this? A medical school diploma.
His.
But then according to this, his age would have to be
212 years old.
The surgeon's age is catching up to his mind. It turns out the surgeon is a fan of Dr. Scott and attended one of his lectures 2 centuries earlier and has been waiting for Dr. Scott to emerge from suspended animation to take over Eterna. He broadcasted a fake PAX signal to lure the crew to Eterna. The surgeon plans to extract blood from Vico and Dr. Crowley in an attempt to improve the immunity of the citizens of Eterna. Their city has long been kept sterile, shielded from outside elements so long, even though they can replace organs and body parts that fail, their immune systems can't defend them from the normal germs and bacteria found in the environment. Instead of a harmless blood donation, an unforeseen complication means the surgeon needs all of Vico and Crowley's blood. Dr. Scott and even the surgeon's assistant Tana then allow Vico and Crowley to escape their bonds, and a brawl ensues, destroying the cloning lab. As the PAX crew escapes, they find the citizens of Eterna all collapsed, seemingly dead.
There's nothing we can do for any of them now. Let's get out of here.
Now in the Vesta Explorer, the crew travels on.
We survived the crash landing and retrieved the Vesta Explorer vehicle. We traveled for days across barren plains, somewhere in the southwest United States. Our food and water have almost run out, but our water detection unit is leading us toward a forested area in a desert canyon.
They encounter an odd forested area that is evidently man-made, with rivers and pools with concrete bottoms. Dr. Crowley comes across a young goat caught in a trap and is captured by the Wardens, one of the groups living in this area. Vico and Scott come across the other group, the Poachers, who he enlists the aid of to find Dr. Crowley, but ends up only getting their flare gun stolen. The area is an overgrown zoo with lions, chimpanzees, and other zoo animals, and the descendants of the zookeepers take care of them, following an old U.S. Fish and Wildlife Code book. But their protection perpetrates a continual struggle between the two groups over the resources of the area.
This book of our law dates back before the famines, even before the great firestorms. Punishment is prescribed here in Section 12. As written by the Elders Commission. First offenders shall be permanently marked for identification by the letter P, to be firmly branded on the foreflank of the offender.
But I tried to help the animal.
It's our duty to punish poachers. We're the chosen wardens of the forest. Of whose camp are you?
I'm not from any camp. I'm old. I come from the past. From a time when this was a park.
You were here in this forest before I was even born. And yet it's true. You are strange, different from other poachers.
Vico and Scott find old animal tranquilizers and rig up a crossbow to free Dr. Crowley. But as they are leaving the area, they see the poachers on the way to attack the Wardens with the flare gun and its seemingly endless supply of flares, and realize they must stay and assist in their defense.
What is it?
He's got the flare gun. Go warn your people. Go ahead. The poachers are attacking. Go warn your people.
to Vesta and be safe.
What defense have they got against our flare gun?
They'll kill each other.
They are successful in defending the zoo and the wardens. And Vico suggests a change in the way they do things.
What about them? What are you going to do with them?
Some of them will receive the penalty of death.
Nothing's going to change. You keep following that old book. Stop those people from getting any water, they're going to come back. Only maybe next time they'll win.
Challenge our laws?
I challenge our laws. The articles were written for a different time. Things change.
Would you write new laws for our book?
You're going to have new laws if you want peace.
With water, the poachers can raise food. Maybe they'll leave the animals alone. Maybe we'll trade with them. Maybe we'll meet them as friends.
Goodbye.
I have learned from you.
Thank you.
Behind the scenes. Some reviews called it an imaginative drama of the possible future. But by the time it aired, according to newspaper articles, ABC had again declined a series order based on this third film in the Pax series. John Saxon again appeared, this time as Captain Anthony Vico, leader of the Pax team. Kathleen Miller was Dr. Allison Crowley. A 70s actress, she appeared in the films Shampoo and Stay Hungry, and the TV series Sorota's Court. Miller died in 2016 at age 71. Keene Curtis was Dr. William Scott. We ran into Keene Curtis before on Logan's Run as the robot Draco. Curtis has over 100 credits. He was a regular on The Magician, as well as Cheers, where he was Sam's archenemy, Mr. Hill, the upstairs owner of Melville's. Curtis was also a voice actor on The Smurfs, The Dukes, and Hanna-Barbera's Space Stars. Keene Curtis died in 2002 at age 79. James Olsen was the Surgeon. A character actor with nearly 100 credits, he has played villains and memorable characters on Wonder Woman, The Bionic Woman, Battlestar Galactica, Little House on the Prairie, and Amityville 2, The Possession. Reb Brown and Catherine Bach, yes, Captain America and Daisy Duke, both appeared in supporting roles. For the first time, we have distinct segments in this one, the longest of the three films. The movie was very oddly edited. The space station intro and first adventure in Eterna was 55 minutes, and the overgrown zoo segment took up the remaining 42 minutes. Each adventure began with a similar voiceover, as if each adventure was intended to take place right after the crash landing of their shuttle. Each segment ends abruptly as well, with it making no difference in what order the segments appear. In fact, I've read comments online where people claim to have seen broadcasts where the segments air in reverse order. Now, having watched the Logan's Run series, it struck me how closely this film resembled those episodes which would come along some 2 years later. In fact, Christopher Mills over at Space 1970 thought the same and had written the following a few years ago. Both shows are set in a post-apocalyptic future with a group of 3 characters: man of action, Logan/Vico, compassionate female, Jessica/Allison, and wise elder, Rem/Scott, traveling in a clunky land vehicle through desolate landscapes in search of a, perhaps non-existent, promised land, sanctuary/Pax headquarters. In both cases, the trio encounters and becomes involved with varied, isolated enclaves of people with their own twisted societies. In fact, the plot points of the first segment are very similar to the Logan's Run pilot movie, where they encounter the mountain city of robots. The fact that Keen Curtis later was the robot Draco in that Logan's Run story makes this even more interesting. Perhaps Saul David and Lynn Katzman took some inspiration from Strange New World when creating the premise behind Logan's Run. Everything seemed to be done on the cheap this time around, using existing Burbank studios, set decorations, wardrobe, props, stock sound effects, as well as your typical easily accessible locations to shoot on. The first segment of Strange New World, where they visit Eterna, was filmed at the Brand Library and Art Center in Glendale, California. One of Glendale's most iconic buildings, its distinct Moorish and Indo-Islamic architecture is clearly visible in several shots. The property has appeared in several films and TV shows over the decades. The $6 Million Man, The Fall Guy, The Naked Gun, and more recently, CBS's Scorpion have all filmed there. Strange New World, to me, is the typical 1970s sci-fi late movie. Exactly the kind that dragged enough to fall asleep to. In fact, I recall doing just that on a late 1980s airing, falling asleep between the two segments and wondering why they were all of a sudden in the woods. The soft-spoken Reb Brown and James Olsen didn't do the sound mix any favors in several scenes. The first segment is your typical 70s dystopic evils of cloning storyline. The medical issues resulting from cloning were very poorly explained, and it is clear they didn't run the script past a science advisor. We saw this story play out on dozens of films and TV shows of the era. The 1971 film The Resurrection of Zachary Wheeler, with Angie Dickinson and Leslie Nielsen, may have been the first film of the 70s, or possibly ever, to deal with cloning, although that term is not used. In this film, a reporter stumbles onto a secret hospital that harvests organs from somas, or mindless clones, for politicians and the corporate elite. In the 1973 little-known film The Clones, a nuclear scientist is cloned by foreign agents and struggles against terrifying odds to prove he is himself and not the clone. These led to the popularization of cloning in 1970s sci-fi TV. The first depiction of cloning I could find on television was the 1973 TV movie The Cloning of Clifford Swimmer. Strange New World was the second. Wonder Woman had to deal with Nazis hiding in Argentina, growing an adult clone of Hitler right into his Nazi uniform in a 1977 episode.
Comrades, just before you arrived, I prepared for cloning living cells in the sacred body of the Führer.
The following year, Nicholas Hammond on The Amazing Spider-Man had a criminal clone him, much to his annoyance.
That's right, Peter. I'm you, and you're me, and this is a gun.
The films The Boys from Brazil, Parts, the Clonus Horror, the 1978 TV movie The Clone Master, and the 1979 TV movie The Darker Side of Terror all depicted cloning.
Tonight, on the NBC Movie of the Week, a chilling suspense movie like nothing you've ever seen. A biochemist succeeds in making perfect clones of himself. Clones that communicate by telepathy. But now, the mysterious group which paid for the project wants results at any price. Clone Master.
The cloning in Strange New World was, of course, depicted as growing a duplicate body to adulthood and keeping it in suspension, I guess, until a spare part is needed. Except some of them are allowed to walk around. It really wasn't clear. It was never explained why all the inhabitants just dropped dead when the PAX team smashed the equipment. I get that many of them were supposed to be clones, but to borrow a phrase, that's not how cloning works. That's not how any of this works. But remember, the idea of cloning, as represented in science fiction pop culture, was relatively new. Although the concept had been presented in Aldous Huxley's 1931 dystopian novel, Brave New World, and several novels throughout the 40s and 50s used some type of cloning as plot points, the term cloning did not enter general public awareness until 1968, when Gordon Rattray Taylor's nonfiction book, The Biological Time Bomb, was published. Much of the fear reflected in pop culture over cloning really represented Western society's irrational fears over in vitro fertilization, or the popular term used then, test tube babies. People that spoke out publicly against this line of medical research even invoked Aldous Huxley and his Brave New World in their arguments. Groundbreaking researcher Dr. James Watson, partially responsible for much of our understanding of the nature of DNA, was an opponent of IVF. Before Congress, he predicted that all hell will break loose, politically and morally, all over the world. Today, of course, IVF is an established, fairly common medical practice. I personally found the second segment to be more interesting, with its tribes consisting of ragtag descendants of zookeepers and game wardens, speaking a decaying form of English, still trying to care for the animals, using the aged rulebook from 200 years ago. And finally, we get lions. The concept of African mammals like lions wandering North America featured in the Genesis 2 script, but this was cut from the U.S. TV version. These were also seen in the opening scenes of Planet Earth. The idea is that they would have escaped from zoos and private ranches and now wander the countryside. Robert Butler was tasked with directing Strange New World. He was a regular TV director that had helmed episodes of The Untouchables, Gene Roddenberry's The Lieutenant, The Twilight Zone, The Fugitive, Batman, and so many others. Warner Television got Reynold Graham, Waylon Green, and Al Ramis to write the screenplay. Graham does not have a lot of industry credits, and this is one of the very first things he worked on. Green was a writer-producer as well as documentary filmmaker, known for Hill Street Blues, Law & Order, ER, and the films Solar Babies, RoboCop 2, and War Games. Al Ramis mostly wrote TV documentaries, but also episodes of The Man from U.N.C.L.E., The Invaders, as well as the TV movies The Island of Dr. Moreau, and, surprise, The Darker Side of Terror. Yes, that 1979 TV movie about cloning. Richard Clements and Elliot Kaplan are credited with composing the theme music. This is actually my favorite of the three themes. Dramatic and engaging, it plays very much like a TV series opening theme. Bill Tice did not come back this time. Costume design was done by Dodie Shepard. Such that it was. The people of Eternal looked like they were wearing standard-issue Roman tunics and cloaks, raided from Burbank Studios' wardrobe department. Dodie Shepard would later work on Star Trek V and VI. In the mid-1970s, the concept of an all-terrain vehicle traversing the post-apocalyptic landscape briefly entered the zeitgeist of popular entertainment, and Strange New World is the first example I am aware of that presents this concept. The following year, Jonah, Ruth, Samuel, and Adam were bringing the promise of a new civilization to the planet on Ark 2 on Saturday mornings. As we said before, in the fall of 1977, Logan and the Solar Craft were driving around on CBS, and the Landmaster braved the post-apocalyptic world in the film Damnation Alley. In fact, let's talk about that vehicle. Called the Vesta Explorer in the film, did you notice anything odd about it? Characters are never seen entering or exiting the vehicle. A close examination of scenes where it appears reveals why. Unlike the full-size vehicles built for Logan's Run, Ark 2, and Damnation Alley, it was in actuality a lot smaller than it appeared to be on screen. I managed to track down author J. Stephen York, who saw the vehicle firsthand, and he related to me the experience. It was ironic, but I came upon the Vesta Explorer while visiting the set for The Waltons. we were on our way to have lunch at the commissary with wheel gear, or I would have found a way to linger and inspect it closer. But there I was, looking at a sci-fi vehicle while walking from a set 1930s house with a shoeless guy in overalls. The Vesta was actually a large miniature, big enough to house a human driver, but certainly not large enough to hold 3 actors inside. The turret with window slots on the driver's side of the vehicle gives you an idea of its scale. This was undoubtedly where the driver's head would be situated as he operated the vehicle. This is why you never see any of the actors enter or emerge from the Vesta, and many shots conceal the bottom of the vehicle with shrubbery as it drives along. You'll notice the vehicle had 8 wheels, but only 6 are in contact with the ground, and the front 2 do not move. This suggests the vehicle was an Amphicat, a 6-wheel drive, 2-seater, amphibious all-terrain vehicle manufactured in the late 60s through the early 1970s. To give you an idea of the size, the Amphicat's body was 53 inches wide and 81 inches long. It had a top land speed of 32 miles per hour. The Amphicat was seen in Space 1999, Blake 7, Banana Splits, and Lancelot Link, Secret Chimp. The Amphicat was featured in a 1970 Popular Science article titled The Cast of the Agile ATVs, and was written, oddly enough, by Perry Mason creator Earl Stanley Gardner, who encouraged Roddenberry with his writing in the early 1950s. The Vesta Explorer was likely built in-house by Warner Brothers, instead of having someone like Dean Jeffries construct it. Had Strange New World gone on to series, the studios would likely have had a full-size vehicle built. Planet Earth wasn't the last we saw of the Dylan Hunt character. In 1997, Majel Barrett Roddenberry and Tribune Entertainment attempted to develop several TV series from Gene Roddenberry's archive. The 2 that ended up making it to air were Earth Final Conflict and Andromeda. Earth Final Conflict was based on Roddenberry's concept Battleground Earth, which he had sold as a series idea to 20th Century Fox in the mid-70s, who ended up canceling the project. Andromeda starred Kevin Sorbo, aired for 5 seasons, and exports the name and some elements of the Dylan Hunt character. Instead of being in suspended animation for 154 years, he is trapped in time for 303 years, emerging in a futuristic dark age. Planet Earth and Strange New World were both syndicated and aired as weekend afternoon and late-night movies on local stations throughout the 80s and 90s. Although Planet Earth seemed to enjoy a longer syndication run, as the last syndicated airing I can find for Strange New World was 1991. Oddly, Planet Earth is the one of the 3 films I recall seeing the least on local repeats. I do remember the ending voiceover more than the plot itself. Unlike Genesis 2, Planet Earth and Strange New World were released several times in the 1980s and 90s on VHS by Warner Home Video and later by Unicorn Video in the US, Canada, and overseas. And there were several different versions of box art used, which are of a science fantasy motif that look far more exciting than the actual movies turned out to be. This was very common in the 1980s, to have garish, outlandish illustrations gracing the covers of VHS boxes to sell the contents to passers-by in the video rental store. VHS box art was even used to sell movies to video stores via catalog, with video store buyers sometimes knowing little more than what was on the cover of the box. Box art was even used to sell video distributors on a title, before there was even a movie to put in the box. Movie producer Charles Band would even present collections of box art to video distributors to see which ones they were interested in distributing on video. Then he would have his team of directors and writers get to work on making the very movies the video distributor bought from looking at the box art. Unfortunately, I cannot recommend the Planet Earth DVD as a purchase. While the video is crisp and colorful, the audio quality is terrible and suffers from static and distortion in the left channel. The distortion is much less noticeable when switching to mono playback. Strange New World had acceptable video and audio quality. Both discs are also bare bones with no extra features, so unless you think you'll watch it more than a couple of times, you may be better off just doing a digital rental. Planet Earth is available on digital rental from YouTube, Google Play, iTunes, and Vudu at time of this recording. Strange New World is only available on DVD. Forgotten TV will return after these messages.
It's the Star Trek Tricorder, complete with a Star Trek cassette adventure, an authentic replica of the Star Trek Tricorder carried by Dr. Bones McCoy and Mr. Spock. It has a built-in microphone and mini readout screen, and includes a carry strap so you can take it anywhere.
I got the tape from Johnny. Get the tricorder. Let's play it.
The Star Trek Tricorder is a full-function cassette tape player and comes complete with pre-recorded Star Trek adventure. Check the mini readout window.
Patrolling outposts.
Listen to the voices of your favorite Star Trek heroes, or turn the cassette over and press the record button, and you can tape your own adventures.
The USS Enterprise is moving to investigate.
The Star Trek Tricorder with built-in microphone and mini readout screen. New solid-state electronics from Mego.
This is the exploration pod of the USS Enterprise, part of the Star Trek collection, each sold separately.
Star Trek!
This is the Klingon cruiser and the Vulcan shuttle. Vulcan shuttle has a breakaway cockpit. You can pretend they battled through space as you send the Enterprise to the rescue.
Star Trek!
USS Enterprise, Klingon cruiser and Vulcan shuttle from the Star Trek collection, each sold separately by Mego.
That brings to a close our story on the Pax trilogy of TV movies. However, that wasn't the end of the story for Gene Roddenberry. Even though he tried to pursue a number of other ideas, Star Trek kept returning to his plate. In 1972, Gene Roddenberry and Paramount struck a deal with Filmation to begin production on an animated version of Star Trek. In September 1973, Star Trek, the animated series, started airing on NBC's Saturday mornings. Although he held executive producer credit along with DC Fontana and tried to be more involved at the beginning, it was really Fontana running the show. For more on the animated Star Trek, check out Forgotten TV, Episode 19. Also in 1972, fan interest in Star Trek was becoming something of a phenomenon. In January of that year, Star Trek Lives, a fan convention, was held at the Statler Hilton Hotel in New York. Although it is often touted as the first Star Trek convention, this is not the case. In 1969, the Star Trek Con was held at the Newark Public Library. Admission was free, and the event had around 300 in attendance. However, the 1972 Con was the first to feature guests. Gene Roddenberry, Majel Barrett, DC Fontana, as well as authors Isaac Asimov and Hal Clement were in attendance. Expecting only 500 attendees, the event was overwhelmed when busloads of fans from other cities started arriving. It is estimated 3,000 people attended. In an auditorium that seated 500, a crowd of 1,500 crammed in to hear Roddenberry speak. A Village Voice article read, "The mood was exhilarating, and when Roddenberry spoke, the crowd exploded. Even he was surprised at the amount of love and appreciation for the series that the fans gave him. At one point, the fans even burst out chanting, 'Star Trek lives!'" Roddenberry would appear frequently at these early conventions, showing the Star Trek blooper reel and relating his message of hope and faith. Hope in the future and faith in humanity's ability to get us there. The animated series, conventions, and growing popularity of reruns in the early 70s had interest in Star Trek becoming mainstream. President Gerald Ford stunned many fans, as well as some NASA officials, when he announced the new Space Shuttle Orbiter OV-101 would be named Enterprise. It had been recommended to him by top advisors as an enormous public relations opportunity after a letter-writing campaign organized by superfan B. Joe Trimble resulted in some 400,000 to 500,000 letters being received by NASA and the White House requesting the name. In September 1976, Orbiter 101 was rolled out at the Edwards Air Force Base to the Star Trek theme and the presence of Roddenberry and the entire original cast. This event seemed to encourage closet fans to come out, as it were. At the cocktail reception, several dozen engineers and NASA officials would flip their lapel over to reveal the hidden pin which read, Closet Trekkie. And after the naming ceremony, conservative Senator Barry Goldwater waved at Gene, yelling, "I'm a Trekkie too." Even before the shuttle naming, the increasing fandom around Star Trek reportedly caused NBC to rethink bringing it back as a live-action series. Gene reported, "NBC requested a new pilot show be submitted. Paramount replied that the rebuilding of sets and replacement of the costumes and props would cost $750,000. At this price, they would proceed only if NBC would order 4 shows. NBC nixed the whole thing, and I went on a vacation to dream up something new." But Paramount was also reluctant to bring Star Trek back as a series. There was a fear that new episodes of Star Trek would devalue the existing 79 episodes, now demanding top dollar as reruns. So Roddenberry began lobbying the studio to produce a feature film instead, with the hope this would instigate its return as a TV series. In August 1974, he wrote to a couple of fans he would soon be writing a motion picture script, which would make Star Trek's return to television more likely. Paramount was quite unhappy with the script Roddenberry ended up submitting, called The God Thing. In this now infamous story, an alien entity declaring itself to be God is on its way to Earth, destroying ships in its path, and Kirk reassumes command of Enterprise to intercept the being. The entity sends a probe that assumes humanoid form on board Enterprise and takes the appearance of religious figures from Earth, including that of Jesus Christ. Years later, author Michael Jan Friedman, brought on to complete the script as a planned novelization, described the scene. In the climactic scene, Kirk had a fistfight with an alien who had assumed the image of Jesus Christ. So Kirk was slugging it out on the bridge with Jesus. In the script, the Vulcans also have negative things to say about the gods of Earth. Not surprisingly, Paramount refused to film this script. By the beginning of 1976, Roddenberry's files indicate the film project somehow morphed into a series development deal he was calling Star Trek II, a sequel series to the original. By July, the project was again a feature film, and Paramount brought in British writing team Chris Bryant and Alan Scott to write a screenplay, which became Star Trek: Planet of the Titans, which would see the Enterprise encounter the homeworld of the Titans of ancient Greek myth. Production design was even done for this project by Ken Adam and Ralph McQuarrie, including an Enterprise design that bears a striking resemblance to the one CBS ended up using in 2017 for Star Trek Discovery. However, this script was also rejected by the studio, and the project was stalled. In fact, the press reported it completely canceled in May 1977, 2 weeks before the release of a film that had a major impact on popular entertainment. On May 25th, Star Wars hit theaters in a big way and took the world by storm. It's possible Paramount executives thought they wouldn't be able to compete theatrically with a Star Trek film, that Star Wars would somehow sate the public's appetite for sci-fi at the movies. But they were also working on something big during all this Star Trek drama. Paramount Pictures purchased Hughes Television Network in 1976, and CEO Barry Diller began planning the birth of the Paramount Television Network. A fourth television network would need content, and Paramount happened to own a popular television series. In June 1977, their public announcement of this new network revealed their intent to return Star Trek to television as a series on Saturday nights in May of 1978. This was now called Star Trek Phase 2, and for Gene Roddenberry, it was full steam ahead for a new series, hiring producers, assigning writers, and creating concepts and designs for the new show. This included the addition of new characters, such as the Vulcan Zahn, to be played by David Gautreaux, and the Deltan Ilea, who would be played by Persis Khambatta. 10 days before this series would begin filming, Paramount pulled the plug on PTN, citing concerns over advertising revenue and the costs of such an operation, making the project a money-losing proposition for the studio. Barry Diller would go on to create his fourth TV network, though, for 20th Century Fox, where he started the Fox Broadcasting Company. However, Paramount decided once again to bring Star Trek to the big screen. Contrary to a very pervasive myth that the success of Close Encounters of the Third Kind played a decisive role in this, the final decision to upgrade Phase 2 into a motion picture was made a month before Close Encounters even premiered. In March 1978, Paramount held their largest press conference since the 1950s to announce Star Trek, the motion picture, would be coming to theaters as a big-budget, $15 million film, directed by the Academy Award-winning Robert Wise. The news came as a surprise to Roddenberry, who had not been consulted or even received a memo regarding the hiring of Robert Wise. Harold Livingston was brought in to write the screenplay, adapting In Thy Image, the intended story for Phase 2's TV premiere. Gene was beginning to feel like he was being moved into the background of his own project. He was right. Although he was still the producer named in the credits, Robert Wise made nearly every production decision after being brought on board. Production issues and script delays postponed the original intended April 1979 release date. There were countless rewrites and issues with visual effects, causing the production to have to hire new visual effects companies in March. This was on a film with more visual effects shots than Star Wars and Close Encounters of the Third Kind combined. However, the studio had set a firm date of December 1979 over Roddenberry's objections. They had pre-sold the film to theaters in a $35 million deal to run during the popular Christmas movie-going season. They also pre-sold it to ABC for TV airings to begin 3 years following theatrical release. Taking inspiration from Star Wars merchandising, studio marketing and licensing executive Don Steele actively solicited merchandising tie-ins to Coca-Cola and McDonald's, and the first Happy Meal licensed property tie-in was for Star Trek, the motion picture. Licensing was also pre-sold to merchandisers for model kits, toys, figures, books, comics, trading cards, T-shirts, a computer game, a Sega arcade game, and a wide array of additional merchandise. Star Trek the Motion Picture silly putty, anyone? Don Steele even staged an elaborate stage presentation for licensees at a toy show where she beamed the cast on stage. The film was produced down to the wire, and the film was barely finished by the December 7th premiere, with the print still fresh from the lab. Robert Wise was the only person to have seen the movie prior to the premiere screening. What ended up being delivered to the public has been referred to by Robert Wise as essentially a polished rough cut of the film. The previous month, it had been reported in the press the $15 million film was over budget, with a final cost of at least $45 million. Roddenberry was responsible for some of the delays and subsequent budget overruns, but the studio also charged the film's budget with the costs of the unproduced Phase 2, which had constructed sets and made costumes, being 10 days away from filming, as well as for all the false starts of 1975 through 1977, for which actors and production people had been paid. The film had mixed reviews at best, and many complained it was overly long and slow-moving. Time's Richard Schickel wrote that the film consisted of spaceships that take an unconscionable amount of time to get anywhere, and nothing of dramatic or human interest happens along the way. The studio didn't hesitate to state their disappointment in domestic box office revenue. However, when you count worldwide box office, the $15 million ABC network sale, and the undisclosed amount they made from the licensing and home video, a conservative estimate of total sales Don Steele said was $250 million, of which the studio royalties range anywhere from 1 to 11% depending on the product, many suspect Paramount made out better on the motion picture than they characterize. If you're interested in learning more about the making of Star Trek the Motion Picture, there are at least 2 books that have been written about it. One is the 1980 book by Gene Roddenberry and Susan Sackett, and a much more recent one is Return to Tomorrow, the filming of Star Trek the Motion Picture by Preston Neal Jones. However unfairly, Roddenberry was implicated by the studio for the high production costs, and Paramount now had an opportunity to distance itself from Gene Roddenberry. He was forced out of creative control of the Star Trek franchise and given a ceremonial figurehead position of executive consultant. And even though there are plenty of notes he wrote for them, accounts of future Star Trek movie productions indicate none of the subsequent movie directors and producers ever took the initiative to consult with Roddenberry in person or in writing again. In 1981, he began working on a novel called Report from Earth. He would never finish it, but it served as sort of a therapy for him, enabling him to work on something other than Star Trek. He seemed to come to grips with the fact Star Trek was moving along without him. Between Star Treks 2 and 3, he wrote to a friend, "My Star Trek is in the past, and I feel terribly good about that, realizing that putting it there has also lifted a heavy weight from my shoulders." He had a corner office in the Hart Building on the Paramount lot and spent his time writing to fans and colleagues. He wrote a lot of letters. In 1984, Roddenberry finally started to receive profit participation from the original Star Trek series. Incredibly, Paramount had claimed the original series was still in the red by $1 million as recently as 3 years earlier. But the threat of legal action, as well as his public comments in the press, caused Paramount to finally settle accounts with him to the tune of $5.3 million. For the first time, the Roddenberrys were wealthy. In September 1985, Roddenberry became the first writer-producer honored with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. In the summer of 1986, as Star Trek approached its 20th anniversary and Star Trek IV was in post-production for a November release, Paramount began developing the idea of bringing a new Star Trek to television. Initially intending to produce a series without him, they eventually decided his involvement would be better, both in terms of fan perception and legally, since Trek carries his created by credit. Without his blessing, he might have legal standing to block a new Star Trek production. Although Roddenberry was now 65 and had announced his retirement, he accepted Paramount's invitation to come aboard. Through his lawyer, Leonard Maeslish, Gene negotiated a handsome compensation package for his involvement. Roddenberry quickly brought on producers Robert Justman, Edward Milkis, as well as writers David Gerrold and D.C. Fontana to form the original production nucleus for the new series. Inexplicably, Leonard Maeslish also came on, and nobody was really sure what he was doing. When creating characters, he honored original Star Trek fan George LaForge by naming the Geordi character after him. George LaForge was quadriplegic and had muscular dystrophy. He had died 12 years earlier. Originally, the series was pitched to the Fox network, but they would only guarantee a buy for 13 episodes, a half season. This was not nearly enough to justify the enormous startup costs for the show. In a bold move by Paramount, it was decided the show would be directly sold to local stations in first-run syndication, instead of airing on a television network. At the time, first-run syndication was the arena of early evening entertainment, such as Sha Na Na, Wild Kingdom, or PM Magazine. Afternoon kid shows like Small Wonder, or continuations of series that got a network cancellation. In a barter deal, the local station sold 5 minutes of advertising, while Paramount got to sell 7 minutes nationally. When it hit the air in fall 1987, it aired in 207 TV markets, 108 of which were network affiliates, and 12 of those airing it in prime time, preempting network programming. For an hour a week, Paramount finally had a de facto TV network, and Star Trek: The Next Generation pioneered the trend of first-run, 1-hour, syndicated drama and adventure series.
Star Trek: The Next Generation is beaming aboard the airwaves. All the wonder, the excitement, the drama of Gene Roddenberry's original Space Odyssey.
Welcome to the Enterprise.
With all-new adventures from the 24th century. With an all-new Enterprise.
This is nothing like any vessel I've seen before.
And an all-new crew. Starfleet veteran Captain Picard, Commander Riker, Executive Officer, Chief Medical Officer Crusher, and her brilliant son, Wesley, Lieutenant Commander Data, an android. The telepathic Troy, Security Officer Yar, Geordi, a man with unique vision, and Klingon Officer Worf.
Shields and deflectors up, sir.
Go to yellow alert.
Their continuing mission to boldly go where no one has gone before.
Let's see what's out there.
Don't miss the all-new television adventures of Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Initially, Roddenberry made a good effort to be amiable and work well with everyone. Early in production, he once handed each of the 4 members of the original production team a $5,000 bonus. Unfortunately, this did not last. One early point of contention was when he rewrote Dorothy Fontana's Encounter at Farpoint script. The studio wanted a 2-hour pilot movie to kick off the series. Fontana had written a script for a 90-minute pilot movie. Reportedly telling Dorothy he had to add 30 minutes to the script because the studio wanted his name on the pilot, Gene rewrote Farpoint, adding segments introducing the Q character, as well as the cameo with Dr. McCoy, played by DeForest Kelley. Fontana ended up taking the episode to the Writers Guild of America for credits arbitration. Gene's behavior and interactions with the staff began to alienate key people, including friends DC Fontana and David Gerrold. Infighting, chaos, and power struggles characterized those early days of The Next Generation. 30 writers and staff members left the show during the first season. Unknown to most, Roddenberry had visited the Schick Shadell Hospital in September 1986 for a 10-day detox and aversion therapy for his alcohol use. During the first season, the pressures of daily production took its toll, and he began visiting Schick Shadell repeatedly on weekends for continuing treatment. Along with his smoking, his years of alcohol and recreational drug use were going to catch up with him. His health was much worse than was generally known, and DC Fontana recalls a time he got up during a meeting and walked into the wall. It was also during this first season that he went on his infamous rant about women, as related earlier by Herb Wright. By the middle of the first season, Roddenberry appointed Maurice Hurley as showrunner to reduce the demands of daily production. It is believed he had a series of minor strokes during these years, as well as normal pressure hydrocephalus, an accumulation of cerebrospinal fluid in the brain. In September 1989, he had a more serious stroke, leaving him incapacitated and in a wheelchair, effectively ending his operational involvement with The Next Generation. At the end of the second season, Hurley also left, and the flame was passed to Rick Berman and Michael Piller to run things, although Gene still came into his office a couple times a week. In 1991, he met with director Nicholas Meyer a couple of times to go over concerns he had with the script in the upcoming Star Trek VI. Meyer walked out of the first meeting. On the second, attended by multiple parties, Meyer seemed more conciliatory, and the meeting seemed to go well. But Roddenberry found his production notes were ignored when he saw an advanced screening of the film. In early October of that year, he suffered yet another stroke, where he lost the use of his right arm. His doctor estimated he would not live more than 6 months. On October 24th, during an elevator ride to a doctor's appointment, he suffered cardiac arrest and passed away. Somewhat fittingly, Roddenberry's ashes were later among the first to be launched into Earth's orbit in 1997, where they orbited the Earth until they burned up on re-entering the Earth's atmosphere in 2002. In 2010, Roddenberry was posthumously inducted into the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences Hall of Fame. It has been said that you should never try to meet your heroes, lest they be found to have feet of clay. Perhaps, like many, I was initially shocked and disappointed learning about some of the aspects of his personal life following his death, much of which was not presented in these podcasts. There's plenty of material out there on that if you care to read about it. Son Rod Roddenberry spent years researching his father's life to try to connect with him following his death, producing his documentary, Trek Nation, and attempted to reconcile the public myth of Star Trek creator with the man. He was presented to me as sort of this Greek god. How does a son identify or connect with someone like that? Doing the documentary was about bringing him to a level where I could identify and connect. And that made me love him more, because he was an average, normal guy who made mistakes, who still had this amazing vision and optimism for the future, worked his ass off and got his vision out there. I want to continue that tradition of a better future, of people believing in us, believing in humanity. Gene Roddenberry had made repeated attempts to launch other projects. Recall that his 1970s efforts didn't end with the Dylan Hunt or Pax TV movies. There were 2 other TV movies he did before returning to Star Trek, 1974's The Questor Tapes and 1977's Spectre. Next year, I must return to this place again to consider those. It is true, nothing was ever as successful or resonated with audiences as much as Star Trek. But there's nothing wrong with that. Like all humans, Roddenberry couldn't cheat or trick his way out of death. But he can remain alive in a way, as long as we remember him. And remember him we will, for he left behind a legacy. Star Trek not only now encompasses 7 official TV series and 13 movies. Others have been directly inspired by his ideas, such as Seth MacFarlane and his current Fox series, The Orville. Star Trek has taken the step of not only influencing pop culture, but culture and society at large, in a way that is impossible to calculate. It is easy to find hundreds of testimonials of people who claim that their career and life choices were influenced by Star Trek. Technologies presented in Star Trek have entered our daily lives. The Motorola StarTAC, the first flip phone, seemed conspicuously modeled after a certain communicator. Uhura's earpiece looks remarkably similar to modern Bluetooth devices. And like the Enterprise's library computer, we now carry flat pieces of glass that connect us with the knowledge found in any encyclopedia. Even though hundreds of others have now worked in his Star Trek playground, adapting and expanding, perhaps even improving on his ideas, these works will always have the credit. Based on Star Trek. Created by Gene Roddenberry.
Space. The final frontier. These are the continuing voyages of the starship Enterprise. Her ongoing mission to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life forms and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before.
Forgotten TV Memorial. Peter Mayhew, best known as Chewbacca from the Star Wars franchise, has died at age 74. Born in 1944 in London, he was working as a hospital attendant when a film producer saw his photo where at 7'3" he literally stood above the crowd around him. He was cast in 1977's Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger. A year later, he was asked to do another role that would change his life. Since 1977, Mayhew had played the Wookiee Chewbacca from Star Wars in numerous commercials, video games, television specials, public service announcements, and public appearances. Incredibly, he kept his hospital attendant job until the third film, Return of the Jedi, came around. For decades, he was a regular at fan conventions, and I have never heard an unkind word said about him. John Llewellyn Moxey, the director of Genesis 2, has died at age 94. Born in 1925 in Argentina, and after serving in World War II, he managed to get a job in his desired field in the editing room. He started as an assistant director in the 1940s before moving over to television, directing a number of the Playhouse-type programs so popular in the day. He went on to helm episodes of The Saint, Mission Impossible, Kung Fu, as well as the Night Stalker TV movie. He went on to have 101 directing credits by the time he retired in 1991. Georgia Engel, the soft-spoken actress who became known as Georgette on The Mary Tyler Moore Show, and in more recent years provided voice talent for the open season movies, has died at age 70. Engel was born in 1948 in Washington, D.C., and began acting on television in the early 1970s on The Betty White Show, Mork and Mindy, Rhoda, as well as the aforementioned Mary Tyler Moore series. In the 1980s, she was a regular fixture on television on Good Time Girls, The Love Boat, Fantasy Island, and the short-lived Jennifer Slept Here. She began acting on the stage and appeared on Broadway on the original run of Hello, Dolly.
Lights out. And now the movies, folks.
Ron Swede, Cleveland TV personality who found fame as the late-night variety show character The Ghoul, has died. He was 70 years old. Swede was inspired by the legendary Ernie Anderson, who himself was horror host Ghoulardi earlier in his career and later became the voice of ABC. A 13-year-old Swede showed up at a Ghoulardi show in a gorilla suit, was invited on stage, and later became a production assistant on the show. Star Trek author Vonda McIntyre has died at age 70. She was the winner of the Hugo, Nebula, and Locus Awards and gave Sulu his first name, Hikaru, in the novel The Entropy Effect. Her novelizations of Star Trek II The Wrath of Khan, Star Trek III The Search for Spock, and Star Trek IV The Voyage Home, as well as Enterprise The First Adventure, were on my bookshelves for years.
Anybody here like me? If you had never seen a Larry Cohen film, you're going to be in for some really radically unique entertainment.
Larry started as a writer, eventually became a director to protect Larry the writer.
Yeah, shut up. We don't need all this.
Wow, what was that? Larry Cohen is so much the invisible man. It's entirely possible to have seen a lot of his work without knowing you were seeing his work.
His movies have this energy and this tact.
He's a madman, but he makes these great little films.
There's a brilliance, there's a childish naughtiness about him.
Larry Cohen, film director known for such cult film classics as The Stuff, It's Alive, and Q the Winged Serpent, has died at age 77. Cohen began his career around 1960 in television, writing scripts for episodes of Kraft Theater, The Fugitive, The Defenders, and The Invaders. In the 1970s, it was B Cinema, writing and directing Black Caesar and It's Alive. Later in his career, he worked on more mainstream fare, such as Cellular and Phone Booth. Next time on Forgotten TV. Join me as I consider Tales of the Gold Monkey. That's next time on Forgotten TV. Want more Forgotten TV? Become a patron on Patreon and gain access to Forgotten TV Supplemental, additional podcasts that go beyond the material presented in the show. On the next Forgotten TV Supplemental, I'll explore who really came up with the phrase Strange New Worlds. What popular late 1970s ABC mega hit did Gene Roddenberry have the idea for in 1956? Was the cage really too cerebral? The real reason NBC didn't buy the series based on that first pilot? What obscure book influenced Star Trek's series format? And what about those infamous lyrics to the Star Trek theme? For as little as $1 a month, you can become a producer and hear this upcoming podcast. The link to join us over on Patreon is in the show notes. This episode of Forgotten TV was executive produced by Will Welton, with producer Ron. Associate producers Collecting Trek, Greg Blanchard, Julio Capa, K.L. Young, The OSI Files, and Tyson Bowler. And production assistant Martin. Forgotten TV is not affiliated with CBS, NBC, ABC, Warner Brothers, Warner Archive, ITC Entertainment, Paramount Studios, or any production company involved in the making of any TV show or film mentioned in this podcast. All mentioned series and associated characters are the property of the respective copyright holders, and no infringement is intended. Audio clips are included for the purposes of review, commentary, and criticism only and are not intended to infringe. And I'd like to thank the following YouTube channels for making those audio clips possible: Joel Gustafsson, Max Power, Steve Balfe, Oscars, German Muhlenberg, Tommy Retro's Blast from the Past, Brick Mantooth, KJM 2672, Spidey O, Videoholic Ultimate, Trek Core. Sources of quotes and background information are from the books Gene Roddenberry, The Man Who Created Star Trek by Van Hise, Gene Roddenberry, The Myth and the Man Behind Star Trek by Joel Engel, Hollywood Heroines, The Most Influential Women in Film History, edited by Laura Bauer, Hollywood Stunt Performers, 1910s to 1970s, by Gene Scott Freese, The Impossible Has Happened, The Life and Work of Gene Roddenberry by Lance Parkin, Star Trek Creator, The Authorized Biography of Gene Roddenberry by David Alexander, Tales from the Cult Film Trenches by Lewis Paul, The 50-Year Mission, The Complete, Uncensored, Unauthorized Oral History of Star Trek The First 25 Years by Ed Gross and Mark A. Altman, Vintage Newspaper Articles, as well as the websites Space 1970, Memory Alpha, Fanlore.org, Star Trek Fact Check, TrekMovie.com, John Kenneth Muir's From the Archives, The Trek BBS. Don't forget to like Forgotten TV on Facebook and follow Forgotten TV on Twitter. Visit forgotten.tv for all content and links. This podcast is written, produced, and hosted by Chris Cooling, and this has been Forgotten TV.